Born into the shadow of the Herodian dynasty, yet raised in the glittering world of Rome's elite, Herod Agrippa's life began at the crossroads of power, danger, and ambition. He was a man who learned early how to survive in a world ruled by emperors, favor, and political storms. From luxurious Roman banquets to tense Judean courts, Agrippa mastered the rare art of winning trust from both Romans and Jews, a skill that would elevate him far beyond what anyone expected from a prince born into a troubled legacy. But greatness always comes with a price. Behind the charm and diplomacy lay a fire and ambition that pushed Agrippa toward influence few in his family had ever achieved. As his alliances grew, so did the admiration of the people. To many, he appeared destined for a reign marked by stability and prosperity. To others, he was a rising force whose confidence edged dangerously close to pride. This story explores that rise how a man shaped by two empires climbed to a throne built on loyalty, charisma, and political finesse. Yet it also uncovers the turning point when admiration became obsession, when honor became hunger, and when a ruler beloved by many stood at the threshold of a downfall no one could have foreseen. If you enjoy historical storytelling that brings ancient lives back to light, make sure to like this video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter in our journey through the past. Let's begin. In the beginning, Agrippa carried himself with a humility that seemed almost at odds with his royal birth. The boy who had once walked carefully through the halls of Roman tutors and Jewish scholars understood better than most the delicate balance required to survive between two worlds. That early awareness made him cautious, attentive, and oddly reverent toward the traditions of his people. He knew how fragile power could be, how quickly favor could evaporate, and how important it was to appear aligned with values greater than himself. Yet as the years passed and his influence expanded, something within him began to shift, quietly at first, like a shadow stretching across a sunlit floor. The admiration he received, once accepted with measured grace, slowly warmed into something intoxicating, a subtle sweetness on the tongue that invited him to want just a little more. His victories, political negotiations, strategic alliances, the trust of both Rome and Judea brought him into a spotlight brighter than any he had known in his youth. People spoke his name with respect. Crowds gathered to see him. Leaders sought his counsel. The affection of the public, so freely offered, became a constant presence around him, a comforting reminder that he had risen farther than many thought possible. And while Agrippa had once walked humbly, aware of the intricate threads holding his world together, he now began to imagine that the tapestry itself depended on him. He no longer saw his fortune as the result of careful choices or timely opportunities, but as the unfolding of a destiny in which he played the central and irreplaceable role. The shift was not immediate. It grew gradually, emerging in moments when applause lingered a little too long, or when advisors assured him that no ruler matched his insight. He began to savor those moments, letting them settle into his thoughts until they shaped the way he saw himself. The respect he had once shown for tradition, for the spiritual foundations of his people, subtly loosened its grip, replaced by an eagerness to embrace the admiration that came so easily. In his, honor was no longer something granted. It was something owed. As this desire deepened, a new seriousness entered his demeanor, a certain confidence that bordered on boldness. Those close to him noticed it in the way he carried his head a little higher, or in the pause he held before acknowledging praise, almost as though he expected it. The stories told in the courts began to shift as well. Where once Agrippa had been admired as a leader shaped by humility and heritage, he now appeared as a figure stepping beyond the boundaries of earthly respect, standing in a space where admiration alone could no longer satisfy him. The energy that once guided him toward unity and stability transformed into a hunger to be seen not merely as a ruler, but as a figure of extraordinary significance. He wanted his presence to command more than loyalty. He wanted The atmosphere around him changed as if the weight of expectation he carried now radiated outward, urging others to acknowledge him in terms previously reserved for something far greater than human authority. This desire, once only a whisper in the back of his mind, grew into a steady call, shaping his decisions and distorting the careful balance he had maintained for so long. Agrippa's path, once rooted in humility and strategic wisdom, now drifted toward a horizon clouded by his own aspirations, the very qualities that had elevated him: charm, intuition, diplomacy were overshadowed by a rising certainty that he deserved more than admiration, more than loyalty, more than honor. It was a turning point, subtle yet unmistakable, where the man shaped by two cultures and two worlds began to reach beyond the limits that had once kept him grounded, stepping into a place where reverence transformed into something far more dangerous. To secure the loyalty he believed he needed to maintain his growing influence, Agrippa began shaping his rule with decisions that revealed how deeply ambition had settled into his heart. In the early years, he had cultivated an image of balance and respect, presenting himself as a ruler who understood the traditions of his people while moving with ease among Rome's powerful circles. But as his reputation expanded, he grew increasingly aware that admiration alone could be fragile. Easily swayed by political shifts or public unrest, he convinced himself that strength, or at least the appearance of it, was essential to secure his position. And in this pursuit, he began taking actions that would echo far beyond his own lifetime. In Judea, a new community was rising, small at first, but rapidly gaining followers who spoke of hope, renewal, and a kingdom not built by human hands. Their message stirred curiosity among ordinary people and caution among leaders who feared anything that might disrupt the delicate balance of authority. Agrippa recognized the moment as an opportunity. If he aligned himself firmly with the traditional leadership, especially those wary of this growing movement, he could reinforce his standing and present himself as the guardian of order. It was a calculated decision that blended political instincts with the growing self-assurance that he was the only one capable of safeguarding stability. What followed marked a turning point in his reign. Agrippa authorized actions designed to demonstrate firm control, believing that decisive measures would silence doubts about his leadership. He allowed the arrest of prominent figures within the community, presenting the move as protection of established tradition. When one of these leaders, James, was put to death, Agrippa saw how strongly the act resonated with certain influential groups, and he interpreted their approval as validation of his strategy. Encouraged by the response, he pressed further, ordering the imprisonment of Peter, whose growing visibility had drawn considerable attention. The decision was meant to signal that Agrippa was unwavering in his commitment to maintaining unity, even if that unity came through fear rather than trust. Yet beneath the surface of every order he issued, something more personal was unfolding. Each step deepened the divide between the ruler he once appeared to be and the figure he was becoming. The man who had once bridged cultures with diplomacy was now pursuing authority through displays of force, telling himself that such choices were necessary sacrifices for the stability of his kingdom. He did not see how far he had drifted from the balance he once valued, nor how much his desire for political favor had begun to shape his judgment. As tensions increased and pressure on the community intensified, Agrippa believed he was securing the future he had worked tirelessly to build. What he failed to recognize was how these decisions revealed the transformation within him, the gradual shift from a leader who sought harmony to one who pursued dominance through control. His actions, intended to fortify his rule, exposed the widening gap between the image he projected and the reality of his ambitions. The path he walked now was no longer guided by the subtle diplomacy that once defined him, but by determination to assert his authority at any cost. Unaware of how dangerously close he was drifting toward the limits of his own power. As Agrippa's grip on power grew, so too did the image he sought to project, one that transcended the ordinary limits of a king and edged dangerously close to the divine. In the eyes of the populace, The distinction between human authority and sacred sanction began to blur, a perception that Agrippa did nothing to correct and, in truth, subtly encouraged. He accepted the honors and flattery offered by those who sought favor, allowing their praises to inflate his sense of infallibility. Each acclamation, each gesture of submission from the crowds, was interpreted not merely as respect but as evidence of a destiny that placed him above reproach and beyond ordinary moral constraints. The man who had once navigated the complexities of Rome and Judea with careful diplomacy now allowed his ego to dictate the course of his rule, interpreting political success as a reflection of divine favor rather than a product of strategy and circumstance. The transformation was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, as he absorbed the attentions of court officials, city elders, and citizens who revered his authority. With every accolade, Agrippa internalized the belief that his position was preordained, that to challenge him was akin to challenging the natural order itself. The warnings that had once accompanied tales of great rulers, the subtle reminders that pride precedes a fall, and that no man could rival God, were dismissed as irrelevant. To someone of his perceived stature, he surrounded himself with symbols of power, attending ceremonies where the lines between ceremony and worship blurred, basking in the reverence of those who approached him with obeisance, and letting their voices echo the notion that he was no longer a mere mortal bound by ordinary laws. Yet, beneath the veneer of divine favor, there lingered a fragile reality, one that Agrippa refused to acknowledge. The very measures he had taken to enforce obedience, the imprisonments, the executions, the displays of uncompromising authority, though effective in the short term, sowed seeds of tension and unease among those who watched him too closely. Some whispered caution, some plotted subtle resistance, and some quietly prayed that no ruler could truly claim the mantle of God. Agrippa, however, saw only affirmation in the grandeur of his processions and the obedience of those before him, mistaking the outward displays of loyalty for genuine devotion to his person rather than a response to the fear he instilled. In his pursuit of ultimate recognition, Agrippa's actions became increasingly performative, a series of calculated gestures designed to reinforce the illusion of divinity. His decisions, once pragmatic and politically motivated, were now filtered through a lens of personal glory. Each decree and public appearance aimed at strengthening the myth of his elevated status. The narrative of the ruler who balanced tradition with authority was replaced by the story of a man intoxicated by admiration, convinced that his earthly power was inseparable from a higher, untouchable right. In this intoxicating spiral of pride and ambition, he ignored the timeless admonitions that no human could oppose the divine and prevail, failing to see how the very forces that had lifted him to prominence could, in the end, unravel everything he had so meticulously constructed, leaving his name as a cautionary tale of ambition untempered by humility or foresight. The festival in Caesarea was meant to celebrate the city's prosperity, yet it became a stage for the unfolding of Agrippa's most dramatic display of pride. A moment that would be remembered not for the festivities themselves, but for the ruler who blurred the line between human and divine. On that day, Agrippa appeared before the assembled citizens and visiting dignitaries in a robe of shimmering silver, the fabric catching the sunlight and casting a radiant glow over the platform on which he stood. The effect was mesmerizing, and the crowd, carried away by spectacle and the grandeur of ceremony, erupted in acclamations that transcended ordinary praise. They called him a god, their voices mingling in unrestrained jubilation, echoing through the amphitheater and across the city streets. And Agrippa, caught in the intoxicating swell of admiration, did not correct them. In that instant, the careful balance between ruler and mortal shattered, replaced by a display of hubris that seemed almost preordained by the momentum of his own ambition. He allowed himself to be carried by the waves of adulation, standing as though the very light that shimmered across his robe affirmed his divinity. The courtiers and city officials, who understood the dangers of dissent, bowed and whispered their assent, reinforcing the illusion that Agrippa's authority had moved beyond earthly constraints. For those watching closely, the moment was both inspiring and disquieting, for the ruler's acceptance of worship signaled a dangerous departure from humility, a rejection of the long-standing truth that all earthly power is subordinate to the divine. Agrippa's ears drank in the praises as if they were the soundtrack of destiny itself, each chant a confirmation of the godlike stature he had come to imagine for himself. The distinction between ruler and deity became almost imperceptible, a line blurred by the orchestrated spectacle, the opulent attire, and the collective fervor of those around him. As the ceremony continued, the celebrations once designed to honor the city and its people shifted into a stage for Agrippa's own exaltation. He moved through the crowd with measured gestures, accepting tokens of devotion and listening to accolades that now sounded less like respect and more like worship. In the convergence of light, sound, and human admiration validated a vision of himself that exceeded the natural limitations of any mortal king. The warning voices of history and conscience, those persistent reminders that no man could claim divine status without consequence, were drowned out by the immediate gratification of attention and acclaim. He saw only affirmation in the spectacle, interpreting the crowd's reverence as proof of destiny rather than a fleeting response to theatrical grandeur. Yet beneath the outward celebration lay a subtle tension, a quiet undercurrent of unease among those who knew the dangers of unchecked pride. Some observed in silence, recognizing that the acceptance of such worship was a dangerous precedent, a signal that hubris had eclipsed wisdom. Others, bound by fear or ambition, joined in the chorus of praise, knowing that to dissent was perilous. Agrippa, however, remained enraptured by the radiance of the moment, blind to the warnings embedded in tradition and conscience alike. The festival became a tableau of human aspiration and overreach, a striking demonstration of how power, when intertwined with vanity, can transform respect into veneration and admiration into a perilous form of idolatry. In that silver-clad brilliance, Agrippa stood as both ruler and cautionary figure, a man whose ambition had led him to embrace the worship of men while turning away from the acknowledgement of the one true God, sealing his legacy with a moment as luminous as it was fateful. The dazzling splendor of Caesarea, which had seemed to lift Agrippa above all human limits, was abruptly overshadowed by a force he could neither command nor escape. The cheers of the crowd, the gleaming silver robe, and the intoxicating accolades vanished into a grim silence as divine judgment fell upon him with unyielding certainty. Scripture recounts, and the historian Josephus corroborates, that an angel struck Agrippa immediately, marking the culmination of a life that had veered from honor into hubris. The pain that followed was unlike any mortal suffering, an all-consuming torment that began in his abdomen and spread with relentless intensity, consuming him from the inside as though his very body bore witness to the folly of pride and the danger of claiming glory that belonged to God alone. For 5 days, Agrippa endured an agony that was both physical and symbolic, a vivid and undeniable reminder that earthly power is transient, and that arrogance before God invites consequences beyond human comprehension. As the days wore on, the splendor of kingship, once the source of his pride, became an empty shadow. Advisors and citizens watched with a mixture of horror and awe, realizing that the ruler who had demanded worship and reveled in adulation was now powerless, laid low by forces that no army, no wealth, and no influence could repel. The worms that consumed him from within were a stark and terrifying image, a visceral testament to the truth that human pride, when left unchecked, carries consequences that are as profound as they are unavoidable. Agrippa's death was not simply a personal tragedy. It became a public lesson, immortalized in historical records and sacred texts alike, demonstrating the peril of elevating oneself above the natural and moral order. In the end, the story of Herod Agrippa is a cautionary tale about the seductive allure of power and the fragility of human pride. It reminds us that no matter how high one rises, respect must never transform into idolatry, and ambition must never eclipse humility. His life, filled with political maneuvering, persecution, and relentless pursuit of admiration, came to a sudden, dramatic, and undeniable conclusion that left both contemporaries and posterity with a clear moral, that true honor is measured not by the worship of men, but by the alignment of one's actions with justice, faith, and integrity. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into history, exploring the rise and dramatic fall of Herod Agrippa. If you found this story as fascinating and thought-provoking as I did, do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more historical narratives, and share this video so others can witness the lessons hidden within the lives of the past. By subscribing, you will never miss an opportunity to uncover the human stories behind history's grand events. And together, we can continue to learn from the triumphs and tragedies of those who came before us.